This is The Law Show on CL 650. Now back to the show.
Okay, there's Bonnie Tyler and I Need a Hero as we come back to the Law Show here on CIL 650. We're talking citizenship law in the wake of Canada Day and all of the swearing-in ceremonies that we all watched to one extent or another just a few days ago on TV. A very happy moment for a lot of people, and frankly, for those of us watching TV, you go, way to go, folks. Good call. Good country pick. You're on our team now. Rudy Kischer and Gordon Maynard are here. They are immigration lawyers. The firm is Maynard, Kischer, Stojicevic. They're downtown at 1168 Hamilton Street in Vancouver and online at vancouverlaw.ca. We're talking about the basics, the fundamentals of Canadian citizenship, in the wake of Canada Day. And we've talked about changes to the process and some of the rules and alterations of hearings and all of that kind of thing. But Gordon, a couple of things that you mentioned we should probably include in this conversation, including revocation. In other words, the government giving itself more rights to take away citizenships. Tell us about the changes and why those changes have come.
Sure. Revocation is taking away citizenship
yes.
from people who already have it.
Yes.
And the old Citizenship Act had a revocation provision in it. And you could lose your citizenship if you committed misrepresentation in your application, for instance. Misrepresentation or fraud. And the process involved going to federal court. The government would give you notice, and if you wanted to contest it, you went to federal court, and there was a procedure there in federal court where a judge of the court would determine whether or not you had committed misrepresentation or fraud.
In other words, you lied on your application.
About something material.
Something, yeah, okay.
And they used this, for instance, when they wanted to take citizenship away from people who they thought had come here after World War II and who had committed war crimes during World War II. And they had, in the process of coming to Canada, they had hidden their background.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so this kind of application was made quite a bit, actually.
Sure.
What the government has done in changing the process under the Act with respect to revocation is they've taken away that federal court hearing. It's no longer a judicial determination. They have also expanded the grounds for revocation of citizenship. It now includes conviction for terrorist acts and these sorts of things.
Okay.
But the process no longer is residing in federal court. It's an administrative process with the minister, meaning the minister's delegate.
So in the old days, you got a letter from somebody in the immigration department saying, we have reason to believe we should revoke your citizenship, and here are the reasons. We'll see you at federal court on such and such a day, and we'll let the judge decide.
Pretty much,
and now you get a letter from the government of Canada saying, you're out of here.
No, you get a letter from the government saying, we think you have committed misrepresentation. Let's take a simple case, ordinary misrepresentation.
Yeah, you lied on your application.
You lied on your application.
Okay.
The government sends you a letter and invites you to make submissions.
Okay, so you at least have a chance to respond to their accusation that you lied.
Yes, I mean, at the very minimum, that would seem fair.
Yeah.
Right? So the person makes a written response. The government, under the new law, does not need to have a hearing. The minister may decide that a hearing is appropriate.
There's no judge?
No, there's no judge.
No third party?
It's an administrative process. And it's not, you're not going to be sitting down with the minister.
Right, of course.
You're going to be sitting down with an employee of the minister's department who's had the delegated authority.
Sure.
Right? And that person is going to, in fact, if you get to sit down with them at all, that would be the hearing. Okay?
And by the way, when you show up to speak to this official, do you get to at least bring a lawyer like one of you two along with you?
Well, they won't encourage it, but they would be obliged to allow you to do it if you brought one along.
Okay.
All right.
So are they trying? Obviously, they've got judges now out of the mix. Are they trying to get you lawyers too out of the game?
What do you know?
Well, it's just. Well, I mean, I understand.
I am shocked and dismayed.
Oh, I know that my such a cynical attitude, eh? But
years of practice.
the whole matter. I don't think many Canadians mind the fact that if you have committed fraud, if you've gamed us, and we catch you later, you absolutely should get the heave-ho.
Good point.
Goodbye.
Good point. Absolutely spot on. I agree.
Okay.
But let's do it properly. Let's do it fairly. That's part of the Canadian milieu, is it not?
We are.
That we believe in a fair process?
Absolutely.
That we don't want to game people ourselves? right? So let's have a fair process. Is this going to be a fair process? Let's see.
Okay.
Okay? We've seen examples of this in the past. There can be bad decisions made. Take, for example, that lady who was here as a living caregiver, made an application for her daughter to come to Canada and was turned down because of the daughter was deaf.
Correct.
And immigration said,
no,
you're inadmissible.
She's going to cost us too much money.
Yep. That case made it into the press.
Right.
There were stories written about it. There was public statements made.
We talked about it on this show.
We talked about it on this show.
Absolutely.
Including statements by provincial authorities who talked about whether or not this would be a burden on the system.
Exactly.
And what do you know? In the press a few days ago, the daughter's been allowed to come.
Imagine.
Good outcome.
Well,
all right?
Well, and this is an election year with the government wanting to warm the hearts of Canadians to some limited extent between now and October 19th.
What that tells us is that the minister's delegate, who was responsible for making that decision on the visa,
felt the heat of the media?
Made a mistake at first instance.
Oh.
Let's say that they weren't absolutely correct in their assessment. All right? Mistakes get made.
Like a 13-year-old girl who's deaf. And the assumption being, well, we couldn't possibly let this person in. It's going to cost this system an enormous amount of money. Well, fortunately, here in B.C., the Minister of Education went, we have schools for the deaf in B.C. This young woman isn't going to cost us a dime.
And those letters were provided. Despite the fact that those letters were provided, the minister's rep who looked at it said, I'm going to discount those. I'm not even going to consider them.
So now a process where you get a letter from the minister's delegate saying, we think you committed misrepresentation.
Right.
We have reason to believe it. Here's why we think it. You make your submissions and we'll tell you what our decision is. How do we know this process is going to be done correctly? How do we know that those representations are going to be taken into account properly?
Openness and transparency was an election theme many, many years ago. And it seems that this government and a lot of their decisions in a lot of areas seem to be anything but.
Yeah, there's a reason why we have procedures in place. Now, the government is correct. Those procedures cost money.
Sure.
Those procedures take time. There's no doubt about that. And it's important to find the right balance. Is this the right balance? I have my doubts.
I think what happened here partially is, when Gordon talked about this procedure being used before to revoke citizenship,
yes,
the number of applications a year ranged around 50. So where there were 50 applications a year to revoke citizenship, whether it be for misrep or war crimes, and it was, federal court's expensive, it's time-consuming, it's very formal.
Right.
What happened, as we talked about earlier on the show, is after an investigation, mostly in Ontario, they found 3,000 cases. Right. I asked the Chief Justice of the federal court. We had a national CBA meeting, and he was taking questions, and I asked him, has the court made any preparations? Because I didn't know that this legislation was coming, and I thought you're used to holding 50 cases here. There's now been allegations of 3,000. How's the court system going to be held? Has the Department of Justice come to speak to you about this? Has the minister mentioned that where you had 50 cases a year, you're now going to be getting 3,000 in 1 year?
Yeah.
And he said no one's mentioned it to me at all. And my guess is they knew that this legislation was coming and that those procedures, they're going to basically do it by sending a letter. Now, as Gordon says, I don't think they've hit the right balance. What they could have done is put some sort of tribunal, perhaps, if not a federal court process, in which we had some sort of third party review those decisions by the minister. Right now, I mean, you think about, the importance of citizenship to somebody's life, all those happy faces we saw on Wednesday.
Yeah.
You can imagine their whole life is built here, their whole future, their children's future, and they get a letter, and what they get a chance is to send in a paragraph saying, no, I think you had the wrong passport in that application. I was actually here those days, and that's it.
Right.
That seems a little too peremptory.
I was lucky enough to have some involvement in a case under the old law involving a fellow who was facing loss of citizenship because of an allegation of war crimes.
Okay.
In the Baltic states during World War II. This fellow lived here in Vancouver. And the government thought that he had misrepresented his background. They thought that he had been employed as a prison guard in the employ of the Germans.
Right.
It was a case of mistaken identity. But it took a federal court proceeding for that to be determined. This could not have come out on a simple submission. It took witnesses. It took a trip to Latvia.
Right.
That process saved that fellow.
Wrong guy.
And it was the wrong guy.
Right.
and it was the right decision. And that's the value of a process.
So is there? This is wonderful because this is my bottom line would be, well, you got to be able to sue somebody. You can't let these guys just toss you around like that. I know they wrote the law, and I know they run the police force, and they can toss you if they want. But as you say, Gordon, if it's something as simple as mistaken identity that you now only get to write back saying, "Hey, I'm the wrong guy." Yep. Here's who I am, and I don't know who you're talking about, but I'm the wrong guy.
Plus, there's no rules for disclosure. You don't really know what they're relying upon in their allegation.
And they don't have to disclose any of that.
There's no formal rules for it. They'll show you as much as they think they need to.
In court, when you had that fellow from Latvia who was accused of being a Nazi guard, did the documentation? Did the government have to show the paperwork that they had wrong?
Of course they did. And I don't want to take credit for that case. Dennis McRae was lead counsel, the best counsel I've ever seen.
Okay.
And he did a brilliant job on that case. But
these cases won't be repeatable in the future.
Not in federal court. So, and not only that, there's no appeal from these decisions. What there is, what the government will say is, there's judicial review. All right? Judicial review is a very strange animal in our court system. And all of immigration is subject to judicial review. And that's not necessarily a good thing to say.
Oh, okay.
Because
a judicial review sounds, again, to the layperson, it sounds like, well, there's a judge.
Yep.
And he or she is going to take a look at all the facts in the case and make a call.
All they look at is the record of the case. It's not a new hearing. It's not an appeal. You have to come forward to the court. You have to present paper and say, I think you should judicially review this because I think the decision was not made fairly. And really the only issue for the judge to decide was the case determined in accordance with the law? Was there any breach of procedural fairness, or was there an error of law committed? And that's a very limited review.
And you don't even have a right to that review. You've got to apply for leave. So you got to make an application to the judge. And if the judge decides no, you know what sort of reasons you get? Zero reasons.
No leave is granted.
So no leave is granted. That's you don't even know why you didn't get leave. So you got to make a case saying, I think I have a case here. I think it's significant, and they get to make the decision yes or no, and you get no reasons for that.
And leave is simply the legal word for permission.
Permission
to have
be
a
heard.
hearing.
Yeah.
Only about 15% of the cases get leave. When you apply for leave, only about 15% actually get leave. If you're lucky enough to get leave and you go to court, then you might stand a 50% chance.
Sterling, I'm not looking forward to the day with the first case that comes in under this new law, and someone who's about to lose their citizenship gets a letter, and I get to say, well, the same minister who's trying to take away your citizenship is going to do so after we put in, make our submissions.
That's who makes the decision.
That's who's making the decision, the person who's investigated you and already decided that they're going to report you.
Yeah.
And if we lose, we get a 15% chance of getting heard by a judge. That's your citizenship. Doesn't matter how many years you've been here, what sort of life you have here. There's no sort of...
How many taxes you've paid here?
How many taxes you've paid.
Interesting. And now, mind you, Gordon, you chose the example wisely of the young girl coming to Vancouver now to finally be reunited with her mom, who's been here forever and a day, and she's deaf, and she's going to be just fine. She'll be just fine. This is a perfect milieu for a young person with a minor handicap to flourish. But the reason she's got the door is open for her is only because of the profile the case assumed through the media, and so the government, feeling the heat, relented.
Yep. And if you look back at the law for immigration and citizenship, but mostly immigration, and you look at the system that was put in place in the 1976 law, which was that decisions that were made concerning permanent residents and citizens in immigration would be reviewed by tribunals. Mm-hmm. All right? And the idea of that was to make sure that everybody had fair access to a review process that was meaningful. There's always been a ministerial discretion to overcome any errors or anything.
Yep.
But the problem was you had to have the ear of the minister. Mm-hmm. And so some people would have it and some people would not. And the idea of the tribunals was to make sure that everybody was treated fairly.
Level the playing field.
What we've seen over the past decade is that being eroded away in the interests of expediency and cost. Mm-hmm. And now we're very much in danger of having a system that is not inherently fair. It's inherently at the will of the minister.
Right.
You got to be concerned about that.
It almost seems anti-conservative, not to take a political kick here, but if you're looking at a government that runs on a policy of small government, small involvement, what's happening here is they're saying, trust the government. Mm-hmm. We're going to make the right decision here. We don't need any oversight. Trust the government. We're going to make it. Although we're the small C's, we don't believe in government. I think it's a bit of a paradox.
It certainly is. We need to take a quick break. This is The Law Show on CIL 650, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes here.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CIL 650.